Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series. Our broadcast today is focused on the TEL, or Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning Environment domain. Learning Experience domain. My bad, on the slide. On the Learning Experience domain. We're specifically going to look at LE3 or subcriteria 3 for the Part 1 broadcast that we're doing today. Our agenda is coming up on the screen, as you can see. We'll begin with a welcome and some introductions for today. Then we'll have an overview of the TEL criteria and its subcriteria. Specifically, LE3 is the teacher provides opportunities for students to process language in the interpretive mode. After that, we'll do some reflecting on implementing LE3 with our proficiency-based North Carolina World Language Essential Standards. And then we'll talk about evidence of LE3 characteristics and behaviors in K-12 world language classrooms. Finally, we'll wrap up and do a few reminders. That's the plan for today. So let's begin with our welcome and introductions. First and foremost, I want you to look at your control panel. We are in a WebEx event. That's what our webinars are called. And you can see on the screenshot that you have a lot of things on your control panel. It's likely that your control panel is on the right-hand side of your screen if you're on a laptop. If you're on a smart device, it might be located elsewhere. It might look a little bit different than what you see here, but it will be similar. As it says there, starting on the right-hand side, you can change your video layout to control where you view the video participants and panels on your screen. I've opted to not show my video today, just so it's less stress on the Wi-Fi system. Also, you can choose the floating panel view to position the panel anywhere you want it, even on a second monitor if you're broadcasting from 2 screens or more. In the middle there, you can see that there are meeting controls, and they hide when you're not using them, so they go away and then reappear when you move your cursor. I'm familiar with kinds of things now, but please keep in mind that those buttons do give you a lot of access, and they also show you how we've got our webinar set up. So on the left-hand side, where you have the little red button with a microphone with a slash through it, that means everyone is on mute because we are recording already. In the middle, you see some black buttons that can show you who's online today, who's participating, as well as a little speaking bubble that takes you over to the chat box. The 3 little dots on the black button next to the red button give you more control if you want to explore that. And then that red button with an X is what you'll click when you exit the webinar at the end of the broadcast. If you accidentally hit it before then, don't worry. You can use the same link to come back into the webinar as you used to join originally. And then finally, there's some place on your control panel where you can access the meeting info and see the kinds of details that you see behind the scenes. So that's our WebEx event. I'd also like to introduce you to our LE3 guest speakers. This entire series is focused on sharing with you wisdom and expertise from our world language teachers who've distinguished themselves by earning either Teacher of the Year honors or TOY honors from FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, or from NC Virtual. We also have model world language teachers who are coming to us because they have earned the Global Educator Digital Badge and are experienced world language teachers. That's who our guest speakers are made up of this year. And specifically for this Part 1 webinar of LE3 and Part 2, we have 4 different guest speakers who will be sharing their experience and expertise with you. The first one is Kristen Campbell, and that's our guest speaker for today. So I will let Kristen introduce herself.
Hey, so I'm Christen Campbell. I'm a French teacher at Chapel Hill High School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I've been teaching for a long time. I think cumulatively, I think this might be 14. I've been at this school for 11 years. And I'm really excited to be here today. And I want to thank Dr. Anne-Marie Gunter for everything that she's done for our world language program in North Carolina. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Kristen. And we're excited about you being here today. As she said, I'm Dr. Anne-Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant, your representative at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Also joining us in the Part 2 webinar will be the educators you see coming up on the screen. The first one will be Alexa Hazelhorst. She was the Teacher of the Year in 2020 with NC Virtual. She is also a French teacher, just like Kristen, in the World Languages department there. And so you see that there are several pictures on screen for each of our guest speakers, and I asked them to share with us some pictures of themselves, particularly in their classroom or in action with their students. So you can see that Alexa teaches online. Next up is Carmen Scoggins. She was the Teacher of the Year K-12 for FLANC in 2007. She teaches at Watauga High School as a Spanish teacher in Watauga County Schools. She's also the methodology instructor at App State. Some of you may realize too, especially given her pictures here on the slide that she's chosen, she's well known as a presenter, even at ACTFL, our national professional organization. Thomas Soth is another guest speaker who will join us for the Part 2 of the Le3 broadcast. He was the Teacher of the Year K-12 in 2013 with FLANC. He's also at Chapel Hill High School, just like Christian, but teaches Spanish. And as you can see, the upper levels of Spanish, Spanish 4, AP, and AP Literature. Please notice too that he has shown a couple pictures of his students, and he has done some speaking nationally as well, specifically with the TEL domain and the learning experience domain that we're focusing on today. And he's been joined by Carmen Scoggins, who's another one of our guest speakers for this series. All right, well now you know who our guest speakers are and who I am. So let's find out who you are and what motivated you to participate in this webinar today. There are lots of things that bring educators to our webinars, especially if you've been teaching all day and this is your after school time. So I want to find out what motivated you to participate in this webinar today. Was it to access professional development made just for world languages? Was it to earn one contact hour for license renewal? Was it to gather information to share with colleagues from your team or PLC or your department or something? Was it to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language teachers? Or was it to find out more about state standards, resources, policies, and so on? I'll go ahead and start the poll. You should see it come up in your control panel. And this is a check all that applies. You can check all the responses that match your motivation for coming to our webinar today. All right, we've got about 20 seconds left on our poll. Please go ahead and get your responses in. Great, thanks so much for doing that. I'm going to go ahead and share the responses with you as well as we talk through them. Please note that almost everybody said that they were joining today because they wanted to access professional development made for world languages. And that's one of the main reasons why we do this series. We've actually been doing a world language webinar series in some format for almost 10 years now. So even before the pandemic changed our world and moved a lot of our professional work online. We also have almost 80% who said you're here to earn one contact hour for license renewal. It's always a good reason to join us too. We need to keep our licenses up to date. When you actively participate in this webinar by responding to things like our poll questions and doing our activities and whatnot, you will earn one contact hour for license renewal. It takes about a week for us to process the attendance and registration information, but you can expect an email with your certificate documenting the one contact hour about a week or two afterwards. All right. Over half of you said you're here to gather information to share with your colleagues from maybe your team or your PLC or your department, and that's also a great reason to join us. Please note that the archives from this broadcast, including the recording we're making right now, the slides, the handouts, and the links will all be posted on the website as well as in our new Canvas Hub for our World Language Webinar series. So you can access that information. You'll be able to access the slides as Google Slides, PowerPoint slides, and PDF, so you can repurpose and recycle as you need to for those local presentations. We also have just over 40% of you saying you're here either to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language teachers, like our guest speaker, Christen, or you want to find out more about state standards, resources, policies, and so on. Those are also great reasons to join us today. I hope you do learn a lot from what we're sharing about the TEL project framework and the learning environment focus that we've got today, as well as from Christen herself about her experience in implementing this in the classroom and looking particularly at interpretive communication. You can always ask any questions you need answered in the chat box, either sending them to me individually or sending them out to everyone if it's something that you think might be a general question. All right, thanks so much for letting us know what motivated you to join today. And the next question is similar, but we would like to know, where are you joining us from today? Is it someplace there in North Carolina? You see that our state is divided into 8 regions, geographically speaking. These are also our economic prosperity zones across the state that the legislature talks about, if you've heard them do that. Or you might be outside of North Carolina or even outside of the US. So once again, I will set our poll to go. And this time is just click the one place you are today that you're joining us from. All right, we've got about 20 more seconds, although it looks like almost everyone has added their answer. If you haven't, please go ahead and do so. All right, you should be able to see the results on your control panel now. We'll just take a quick look. It looks like we have about the same number of people from the Piedmont Triad region as we have from the North Central region today, followed closely by the Southwest region and the Western region of the state. We also have people joining us from the Sandhills region that you see there in purple on the screen, and from the Southeast region as well. So 6 of our 8 regions are represented today in our live audience. We also have 1 or 2 people from outside of North Carolina who are with us. Great. Thank you so much for sharing where you're joining us from today. All right, let's get started with our overview of the TEL criteria and subcriteria. As I said, this is a learning experience domain. You see a snapshot of that document in the upper right corner of the screen. And we're going to focus on LE3. The teacher provides opportunities for students to process language in the interpretive mode. This TEL criteria is a direct support for our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, our state standards for teaching languages. As you can see, LE3 refers specifically to the interpretive mode of communication, which is standard number 2 on our list. Please also note that interpretive communication means reading, listening, or viewing. So you're, as a learner, receiving information in this case and interpreting it or trying to understand it and comprehend what's happening. The screenshot you see from the slide is right from our administrator guides for world languages. They give an overview of our standards, as you notice there, and actually have the weave graphic that shows how our 4 different essential standards and 3 strands are woven throughout everything we do in the classroom when we write standards-based curriculum and do activities and assessments with our students. One thing I'd like to share with you, and I'm going to put this in the chat so you have a direct link to it, is this document you're seeing on the screen. This is page 1, And our administrator guides for world languages all have this on their page 1 that gives this overview of our standards, particularly for administrators who come into our classrooms to observe us and do our annual evaluation. And so this kind of explains what world languages is, and then the administrator guide goes on to get more specific about different programs. After that overview on this first part of page 1, there's some additional information about each program that varies a little bit. And so I've also put in the chat box links to the individual administrator guides for specific language programs like classical languages where Latin and ancient Greek are taught, for dual and heritage languages for things like dual language immersion and heritage language programs, and for modern languages where language is taught as a separate subject. So you can access all of those materials as well if they would be helpful to you. But let's go ahead and take a look also at the TEL Learning Experience Domain criteria. Some of you, I think, are probably familiar with the TEL project, the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning project, and probably know that it started in about 2013, 2014, and the first documents that were released were actually published in 2014 and made available nationally. This is a national project. It's now managed through the National Foreign Language Resource Center at the University of Maryland. But as it's grown and evolved over time, feedback has been gathered from teachers and they've refined what the learning experience domain includes. And so in 2019, not too long ago, they actually revised and updated all the materials for the TEL learning experience domain and the entire TEL project for all 7 domains that we work with. What I'd like for you to do now, as you see coming up in the chat, just like on the screen, there's a link to the TEL learning experience domain criteria document. So I want you to download a copy for yourself, either from the chat box as a PDF Google link, or from our World Language Webinar Series webpage on the Google site, or from the TEL Framework webpage itself, where you can find the Learning Experience Domain document posted. So download a copy for yourself and skim the 7-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus, that LE3. I'll give you a moment or two to do that, and I'll check for any questions. All right, I hope you've had a chance to click on one of the links and find a copy of the Learning Experience Domain Criteria and download it for yourself. Maybe saving it onto your desktop, maybe doing old school and printing it out, but just having it handy so that we can really look at it. And you'll have a copy for yourself to reflect on as we go through and also use later as you need to. So now let's use this document and our information about LE3 to reflect on how we implement our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards. As we said, LE3 specifically supports standard number 2, and that's important for us to think about when we consider what we do with our learners when it comes to interpretive communication. So let's take a look at the TEL criteria, sub-criteria for LE3, one at a time. The first one, and they're lettered, the first one is A. Teacher ensures that at least 90% of what is shared with students is in the target language. Remember, 90% or more is always our goal for the use of the target language in our classrooms with students. Consider that can be what is said or signed. It can be what's provided as far as reading materials or viewing materials. It can be what's posted on the board we're using or the virtual space that we have for our students. And it can be in other ways as well. The next sub-criteria for LE3 is the teacher minimizes the use of English by carefully and deliberately determining when and if it is necessary. Now, obviously, B goes along with A because there are a few times that a teacher might need to use English rather than the target language, but they are very few. And so it's important for us as educators to really consider, how do we minimize the use of English so we hit 90% or more of the use of the target language in our classrooms? And when is it absolutely essential to use English with our students who primarily are native English speaking students? I know for me as a teacher, the only time I really used English was if there was an emergency of some kind. Fire alarm went off or something like that, where we had to move quickly, I might switch to English. But other than that, I stuck to the target language. And I was a French teacher, by the way. All right, the next subcriteria, C, is the teacher uses a variety of verbal and nonverbal strategies to make language comprehensible. Remember that interpretive communication that we're focusing on looks at reading, listening, and viewing. So there's a lot of things you could do or say or sign or provide for students that could help make the language comprehensible, in addition to things like nonverbal strategies and repetition and some of those other things that we do as teachers to make sure that our students are comprehending what we're helping them learn, especially when they're at the beginning levels of language instruction. Subcriteria D is the teacher uses a variety of strategies to allow students to monitor their comprehension. And again, we see this focus on a variety of strategies, but this turns it on the student. How do you help your students think about how well they're understanding something, how well they're interpreting what they're reading, listening to, or viewing? Subcriteria E says the teacher facilitates activities to allow students to interpret, analyze, and interact with authentic materials. Authentic materials and authentic resources are one of the key components of interpretive communication because we want our students to be reading or viewing or listening to resources that were made for native speakers of the language that they're learning. That takes a lot of work sometimes, especially again when we're working with beginning language learners, because we want them to use the skills they've got to first interpret that, but then also be able to think about it more carefully, to analyze what's there, and then to interact with those materials so that we know they're understanding and they're getting a deeper knowledge of what's being shared in those authentic materials. Subcriteria F is back to a variety of strategies, this time to frequently check that students understand the message of written and spoken text. And I would add to that signed text as well for our American Sign Language or visual language learners. So again, a variety of strategies, and this is more about formative assessment, those quick checks for understanding, comprehension checks, and things like that that we do all the time. And finally, subcriteria G. The teacher ensures students have sufficient time to process in the interpretive mode before producing language. And this again is another thing to think very carefully about when we work on interacting with students and encouraging them to interact and use the language, to produce the language rather than just interpret it. We're focusing today on interpretive communication, which is standard number 2. But of course, there's also standard number 3, presentational communication, where they produce language either in speaking or writing. And there's interpersonal communication, where they are producing language as well, but in a more informal sense where they haven't rehearsed it or anything like that. So we need to think about how we give them enough time to process in that interpretive mode before they start producing language. These are the 7 subcriteria for LE3. So now that you've seen that, I want to ask you, when you think about your teaching and how your students learn, which of the subcriteria are professional strengths for you? You can choose up to 3, and there are 7 to choose from, so that's quite a lot to think about. So consider which of these are professional strengths for you. I'll go ahead and open up the poll. This one's a little bit longer because we need a little bit of time to think about this. Please go ahead and click on up to 3 of the subcriteria that are professional strengths for you when you think about your teaching and how your students learn. 10 more seconds to get your responses in. All right, thank you for responding. I'm going to go ahead and show you in your control panel how everyone responded. And you can see that, for example, subcriteria C about teachers using a variety of verbal and nonverbal strategies to make language comprehensible is a professional strength for a vast majority of people, almost 80%. That's followed closely by subcriteria E that looks at facilitating activities that allow students to interpret, analyze, and interact with authentic materials. And then G, where 50% of you said that's a professional strength because you ensure that students have sufficient time to process in the interpretive mode before producing language. The others were also marked as strengths. I can see that F and D got over 40% of you. And then B and A also got some folks, almost a quarter of you. There's a lot of professional strengths there. And we have to keep in mind that as we grow and learn as teachers, as practitioners, this changes obviously over time. Maybe what was a strength for you before the pandemic and the way you were teaching there has changed and shifted a little bit after the experience of teaching the pandemic and maybe teaching online or remotely or in a hybrid or concurrent fashion for some period of time with students. So it does change and shift over time. Well, now we are to the part of our broadcast where you get to hear from Christian. Because when I asked her this same question, which of these subcriteria are professional strengths for you? She answered B, F, and G. So Christian, why don't you go ahead and talk about why those are professional strengths for you and what happens in your classroom that helps you know you're implementing these particular subcriteria in a way that's helping your students learn.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for being here. So first, you should know I'm not perfect, okay? And I think like everybody, I think what makes us strong teachers is just reflecting about our students' learning, right? So that's the most important thing. So the first criteria, and when I was thinking about these, one thing I noticed is that they all overlap. And so, when we talk about A, using the target language 90% of the time, then obviously that goes to B, and they all kind of are woven together. And I think that's one thing that makes the TEL project and these standards really, really strong, is because there is so much overlap. So the first standard or first criteria, sub-criteria I wanted to talk to you about was the teacher minimizes the use of English by carefully and deliberately determining when and if it is necessary. So I use a lot of low-tech tools to make this happen. And something I've started using this year has been large sticky notes. And when I'm introducing new vocabulary, I will write it on the board or write it on my sticky note, my large sticky note, and I will keep it posted there for a while. And then every time I use it or a student uses it, then I will go over the sticky note and be like, hey, look, this is the word we're using. And so that's been really helpful because in a way it's like a cheat sheet, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because we know that through high frequency exposure and use, that's actually going to help them build their vocabulary. And that's so important. The other really low tech and perhaps like one of the most effective strategies I have for assessing if my students are understanding or not. So this kind of will go to like F as well, is called thumbs up, down, or neutral. And even in my lowest level classes, I can say it in French. Okay, fais ça si vous avez bien compris, ou pas du tout, ou puis moyen. They understand that because in the United States, this is something we do, right? And so that has been really helpful for them to share with me how they feel in terms of their understanding. And it also informs me if I need to go back and I need to like re-explain something or try something else. And sometimes too, I ask them to put their heads down to share that information, so they feel less like on the spot. And they're generally, I mean, I sometimes will get a kid who doesn't participate. I'm like, I need to know, like, what was it like for you? So, anyways, but those are super helpful. And then, I feel like one of our strengths as language teachers is our animation, right? And our ability to perform for our students and act, and that tells a lot about what's going on. Um, so draw pictures, have use crazy gestures and faces so that your students can understand a little bit more. Use the resources that you have in your classroom. Like, do you need to talk about school supplies? Grab their backpack, okay, or see what else is on their table. That's really helpful. Sometimes I get stuck when a student will say the word in English, and I'm like, okay, hold up, kids. I also speak English. Remember that we're working on your language development. And I feel like now, it's November, we've gotten to a point in the year where they know not to do that. And so, it's taken some time to like get to that point, but we got there. All right, so the second sub criteria is F. The teacher uses a variety of strategies to frequently check that students understand the message of written and spoken text. So the ideas, and this also again ties into G, because I think the preloading activities that we do for understanding and interpreting an authentic reading or audio or video is almost more important than the actual product itself. Yeah, let me turn on my lights. Sometimes they turn off. Magical. I'm not sure if you noticed that or not, but okay. So the preloading strategies are so essential. And to me, they're almost more essential than the actual product, because in the preloading activities, right, we're building vocabulary. We are setting our students up to create context about what's going on. So for example, in my French 4 class right now, we're talking about Louis Cyr, who is a French Canadian. He was a strong man, lifted weights. He's actually, I think, still currently the strongest man in the world. Popular during the early 20th century. Anyways, and so we talked about, before they saw this, before I told him who this person was, we talked about what is a hero. And we do a lot of brainstorming. That's really, really important for their thought processing and to like access the prior knowledge, but then also to hear other peers like, okay, what else is a hero? Does it have to be somebody who wears a cape? Like all of these things. So having these preloading activities, again, got them thinking about what the topic was going to be about, and then also gave them the vocabulary so that they could start recognizing things when I showed them the product or the text or the video. And that's super, super, super helpful. We also do a lot of like checking in with our neighbors, like, did you get that? Let's see, the last two kind of overlap my second to last strategy, third to last strategy. So one of my favorite strategies, and this is generally used, I usually use it for like a written text, so like an article or a blog. But I have my students, so they chunk the text, or they break it down in small pieces. And then instead of writing like a sentence where they summarize what that part was about, they actually do, I call it a hashtag summary. So they just do like 3 or 4 hashtags where they're talking about what are the common themes. And then usually after they've done it individually or with a partner, then we come back as a class and I write those hashtags on the board. And it definitely, I think breaking it down into smaller chunks, and it's really just the chunking that's cool, but the kids will do anything for a hashtag. So even though I know it's like kind of out of date right now, but like they're like, oh, cool, we're doing hashtags. I can do that. It helps create the buy-in, which is part of what we need. And then again, like if you can partner them with a peer, generally there's more buy-in. And they have that, sometimes they're more confident to check in with a neighbor than they are with a teacher, because they don't want to be wrong, right? Okay, and then the last sub-criteria, G, the teacher ensures students have sufficient time to process in the interpretive mode before producing language. So this is super, super important. And I have totally been guilty of this, but sometimes I'm like, okay, we need to finish this because tomorrow we're doing that. But if we don't allow for that time for processing, then the next piece will be like, it just won't be effective at all. And so I think especially this year when we think about like the gaps in content that our students are dealing with, it's really important that we pay attention to that and provide them with the time to process or to relearn skills or to scaffold an assignment more, because those steps to build up to whatever the final language production is hugely important. And it's also going to make our students more confident, but then it's also going to make whatever we're evaluating, I think, a lot better too, right? Because we want them to have those skills. So, and that kind of is not fun as a teacher, because I don't know if you're like me, but I have like a calendar and it's very well organized, and I'm like, okay, we need to get to this, but we need to get by to the imperfect by this date. And now again, in the context of like it's we're not grammar focused, but like in terms of like what skills do they need. So remember that learning totally takes time. And I frequently use this phrase with my students because they'll ask me, well, how long does it have to be? And I tell them, quality over quantity. And so when I'm thinking about this year in contrast to other years, I have to remind myself, like, it really doesn't matter how much we're getting through. It's really about the quality of what they're doing. And so that reminds me to take a step back and let them process, because we know that all our students are processing at different times, and at different speeds and at different levels. And so making sure that we have that sufficient time is important for their learning and their language production, but it also requires us to be incredibly flexible. And so I definitely have provided a lot of class time for students to, work on skills that are not necessarily evaluated for a grade, right? They're more formative. And that allows, like, it helps also to level out the playing field and make sure that all students have access to a French-speaking person at school, or can help them with certain skills. And so that has been really, really important. So for G, quality over quantity. That's my point for that. All right, Dr. Anne-Marie Gunter, you can.
All right, well, thank you so much, Christian. This has been a really good way for us to think about what it means to have, learning environment strengths, and what it means to look at that learning experience and think about interpretive communication, essential standard number 2, and some strategies that work with that. I want to ask everyone to kind of pause and think about, okay, when you're considering these sub-criteria, whether it's the 3 that Christian talked about, or it's the other 4 or some combination thereof, that they're still visible in your control panel from the poll question. One of the things we have to consider is, how do we make this visible to others? because having a conversation like this where we're sharing strategies and learning from each other is always a good thing to do as world language teachers. But also, what does that look like to others? What does it look like to, let's say, a principal who comes in to evaluate us? What does it look like to our students or other visitors to our classroom? And that's one of the things we're going to consider next. So, Christian, thank you so much for sharing your professional strengths with us and some of the strategies you use in the classroom. Do you have any last words of advice on interpretive communication and the professional strengths you've kind of shared with us?
Just to be patient with yourself and, remember that each one of our students, they're unique. And so something might work for one group and then it's not going to work for another one. And then the other thing I thought of was like having routines, right? And so, if we have routines, I think about my 16-month-old, if I have routines with her, she's going to better understand what to expect. And I think that's the same thing with our students, having those routines will help them feel more confident and know what to expect. So, but yeah, you're all doing great. You're all rock stars. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. And she's at 100% correct. You are all rock stars. You're doing well. This school year is moving along quickly. We are already in November, but it's always good to stop and reflect on the kinds of things we do every day in our classrooms and consider how well we are implementing something like interpretive communication, standard number 2, and also to learn from others. What else could we do to implement this standard effectively in our activities and our comprehension checks and what we do with students? So as we go on, I wanted us, like I said, to really think about what is the evidence of LE3, particularly characteristics and behaviors when you walk into a K-12 world language classroom, or I should say just go into a K-12 world language classroom, because some of us teach online, in a hybrid environment, and some are in person. So it varies quite a bit what a K-12 world language classroom or learning space looks like. But I want us to really consider, what do teachers and or students do in the classroom to show evidence of LE3 subcriteria? And here are the LE3 subcriteria again on the screen, but you can all see them in their control panel too. And when we think about what do teachers and students do, of course, we're going to look at the verbs. We're language people, and we sometimes like to focus in on things like verbs to make sure we're doing or acting the way we need to help our students learn. Take a look at the verbs. Teachers ensuring students get what they need, minimizing the use of English, using a variety of strategies for verbal and nonverbal, allowing students to monitor comprehension, and also facilitating activities and ensuring students have sufficient time. So those verbs are critical to helping us understand what we would look for, what characteristics we would look for, and what actual behaviors in the classroom we would look for when we think about LE3 and interpretive communication. So I'm going to have you do that with a Jamboard. Now, some of you might have used a Jamboard before. I'm going to pause for a minute and just ask for a show of hands using your electronic hand button on your control panel. Who here has used Jamboard before? May have used it as something that's part of Google Suite, or it may be new to you. I'm looking for raised hands and I really don't see very many. All right, a few, good deal. Oh, I see a couple now, great. Well, Jamboard is, like I said, a Google tool. So if you use Google tools already, like Google Documents or Google Spreadsheets or Google Slides, you can do Google Jamboard. I'm going to ask you a question that we're going to answer on the Jamboard, which is kind of like just a big sticky note where you can put your thoughts with little sticky notes. So again, the question is just what we're talking about right now. What characteristics and or behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence for one of those LE3 subcriteria we've been focusing on? What I'm going to have you do is think about which LE3 subcriteria you want to write about, because you only have to write about one. Then on the sticky note that you have, you're going to create for this activity, you're going to title your post with the letter of the subcriteria, A, B, C, etc. through G. And remember, you're just picking one. You're going to write your response about how that sub-criteria's characteristics and behaviors look like for someone observing them in the classroom. And then you can include your name on the sticky or you can remain anonymous. It's totally up to you for this activity. You'll also have a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the Jamboard. And then we'll take about 6 minutes start to finish with this activity. And we have enough time to do that today, so that's good. So for those of you who haven't used the Jamboard before, now is the time to learn about it. Jamboard, as I said, is a Google tool. And when you go onto the Jamboard, because we have the bit.ly link that you can go to, you see a control panel come up on the left-hand side. And what you're going to do is pick a sticky note. And when you click on the sticky note, our arrow should be just one more up to do the little sticky note with the turn down corner. You can choose what color your sticky note is, just like our regular paper sticky notes. Of course, they can be different colors if you like to organize with color coding. Then you write in your response to the question, what characteristics or behaviors would you see in the classroom for that LA3 subcriteria? Remember, you're starting it with the letter of the subcriteria. And then, of course, we hit save always, and that posts the sticky note for everybody else to see on the Jamboard. And Christian has actually already added one for us. So you can see that she has focused on subcriteria B and even included a picture to go with it where she's talking about posting high frequency vocabulary words and that kind of thing. Kind of some of the things she talked about in her presentation about her professional strengths and her strategies with those professional strengths. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put in the chat box a link to our Jamboard, and I'd like for you to go out there, go ahead and make it sticky, just like we said. If I click out to the Jamboard, you can see that it comes up. Over on that left side is the control panel. You just hit the little sticky note, and as I said, it comes up, and you start it with the letter that you're going to respond to, the subcriteria, and write your response. And then just hit save. And it actually gives you another one. Boom. And as you can see, this is just a whiteboard we have the sticky notes on. You can move them all around. I see people already starting, and you can see Kristen's sticky note is there as well. All right, that's our activity. So you've got access to the Jamboard. You know what to do, and our instructions are on the screen. I'm going to time us out for this activity. Like I said, we'll have 6 minutes. Let's go ahead and answer the question. What characteristics in our behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence for one of the LE3 subcriteria? Wow, we've got about another minute or so, but just take a look at our Jamboard and all the sticky notes that are popping up. There's a lot to read here. And don't worry, we'll post the Jamboard too with our handouts from this broadcast so that you can always go back and look at it later as well. All right, we're at 6 minutes. So thank you everyone for your contributions today. I hope you learned quite a bit from Christian today, talking about her own experiences in the classroom and thinking about implementing interpretive communication, our second standard. I hope you've also been able to reflect on how this looks in your own classroom. What can you learn about LE3 and think about to reflect on your own professional practice and sharpen your skills, hone those skills so that you become even better world language teachers. I'll go ahead and leave the Jamboard up for a while. So if you'd like to add additional stickies, maybe you want to talk about 2 or 3 sub-criteria, but it's just one per sticky note, you can certainly do that. I'm looking at our time now. I want to finish up today so that everyone has time to close out and then go on with their evening. So we are to our wrap up and reminders. First and foremost, always know that you can get information about our webinar broadcasts, about opportunities, about other professional development, about resources on our NCDPI listservs for world languages. By virtue of registering for this webinar, I will make sure your email address is on our World Language Instructors listserv. That's a K-20 listserv for all of our world language teachers across the state. But you may also want to sign up for our World Language Education News, for our DLI Educators listserv if you work with dual language immersion programs, or with the NC Linguafolio listserv if you work with that formative assessment tool. All of those are there, plus others from NCDPI, other areas, and other initiatives that you may be interested in. Also, don't forget, this is part 1 of our LE3 pairing of webinars. Our next one, part 2, will be on Wednesday, December 1st at the same time, 4 to 5 p.m. I like to keep our World Language Wednesdays consistent so we all remember when they're coming up. If you want to register for the part 2 of LE3, you can with the link that's already in the chat box. As I said before as well, the materials and recording from our webinars are posted as archives, so you can use those resources locally and or adapt them for your local professional development that you may want to do. Also, the archives will be available for a period of time and can be completed asynchronously. So if you liked what you learned here and you want another colleague to benefit from that, they can actually listen to the recording and do an exit ticket and earn a certificate of completion worth 1 contact hour. Also, don't forget, we have a whole series. Like I said, we do an annual series. I try to have 10 broadcasts or 10 contact hours worth of content for you, so that's world language specific. If you want more details about our upcoming webinars, which are going to focus on not only LE3 and its sub-criteria from the learning experience teledomain, but also LE4 and LE5, as well as PF1 in performance and feedback, you can go right to our webinar page and get information about that, the dates and so forth, and sign up and register for the ones that you're interested in. Also, don't forget, because of your active participation today, you will earn a CEU certificate. Always note our public school units, PSUs, or districts and charter schools, must approve professional development offerings in all formats that we have. But if you participate today, you earn your contact hour towards the CEU for license renewal. As I said before, that contact hour comes in the form of an email with an attached certificate of attendance, probably about a week from today. And then our archives will be available for a period of time and can be completed by individuals asynchronously. I'll also post our archives and just keep them up in general, even past that asynchronous completion time, so that you can continue to use them throughout the year. Thank you so much for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anne-Marie Gunter, World Languages Consultant, serving your needs at the state level. If you want to reach out to me, you see my contact information on the screen. You're always welcome to do that via email or phone. Our Google site is up too with a lot of world language resources. We will be transitioning the Google sites soon over to the Drupal web pages on the regular DPI site. So look for information about that as that transition happens. You can also catch me on Twitter at Anne-Marie Gunter and at hashtag World Language Wednesdays. If you want, you can reach out to my section chief or my supervisor who has not only world languages but also ESL and English Language Arts or ELA. That is Stacy Daniel, and I believe she was on the line with us earlier today, and she may still be, but she sends her greetings as well and encourages you always to take part in professional development and information offered by NCDPI in whatever areas you work in. And finally, Teresa Parker is our administrative specialist for our section for ELA and languages, and that's the person who will be emailing you your certificate of participation from today, or certificate of attendance. So look for that email from Teresa soon. Again, I thank everyone for joining us. I want to give a special thank you to Kristen for sharing her perspective on LE3 and how she implements the interpretive communication mode in her classroom. Many thanks, Kristen, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. All right. Well, we hope everyone has a great evening. And I'm going to go ahead and click stop on our recording.